So what I'd like to do in these 30 minutes that I have with you is to review, to revisit some of the key concepts of inclusive education. And I want to do that because many times we use the word inclusion and we use the expression inclusive education, but we are not necessarily talking about the same things. So I want to make sure that we are on the same pace when we are using this term inclusive education. And my goal, and this is the main structure of my presentation, is to share with you where the main challenges that countries are struggling with are, what are these main challenges that we face right now for an effective implementation of inclusive education policies, and then to share as well the recommendations of the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education to bridge this gap, of course, with a main focus on what universities can do, where the academia, policymakers and practitioners can work together. Let me start with clarification, and this is important. Mary said that at the European Agency and also in the legislation that I had the opportunity to develop in Portugal, we do not necessarily categorize. And throughout these 2 days, I heard many really stimulating talks that were very targeted, some for Roma children, some for migrant children, some for migrant refugees. Not so many, but we know that when we're talking about inclusion, we always bear disability in our minds as well. And the risk is, we need these programs, but the risk is that we forget that even in each of these groups, we have lots of differences and that there is great intersectionality. A Roma child can be autistic. A migrant child can suffer bullying because of his sexual orientation. So each case is a case. And education systems have been built on top of a very big fallacy. It's the fallacy of equality and homogeneity. I often use this image. I'm short-sighted since I was 9. So the only way for me to have a homogeneous audience in front of me is if I take out my glasses. I do this, and now you are all homogeneous, but I don't see anyone. I cannot see anyone. So I don't see the specific needs of each individual in front of me. And when I do this, what I may be led to do is to try to categorize you and say, you are all equal, or at least I manage to see men and women, more or less, but I don't see what each individual really needs. So when we're talking about inclusive education, we are talking about equity and access, but we are mostly talking about achievement. It is not enough to say that schools are open to everyone. We have to make sure that when we open the gates, we are able not only to integrate, but provide the means for everyone to be taken to the full potential that he brings with. And that's the difference between inclusive education and other systems. We do not begin from what someone cannot do. We begin from the potential of everyone. And an inclusive curriculum is a curriculum that takes each and every one to the limits of its potential. As maybe you've seen, I have to walk with a stick because I have a foot that doesn't work. Does this mean that I cannot do anything? It just means that I take more time. But I want to live in a world in which I'm not prevented from walking, and that I want to challenge myself with going further and further. Last year I did the Santiago Way, 132 kilometers with my stick. And first I believed I will not be able to. But I had 2 friends that walked slower, and then we got to the goal very happily, and we were all very happy that we managed to do it. It's important to clarify the concepts, and the big confound is between inclusion and integration. And many times we think that we are including, but we are just integrating. It is important to know that most of our countries, most of our education systems took this journey. And the integration moment is an important one because we don't attain full inclusion without going through this step of integration. I always like to give an example that was my biggest lesson on the difference between integration and inclusion. In Portugal, we have one day per year in which there is a simulation of an earthquake, because in the 18th century we had the big one. And what we do in the schools, we teach the kids the rules of protection when there is an earthquake. And by sheer coincidence, I once visited a school in which in 2 classes there was a child in a wheelchair, actually with the same physical condition. And when the bell rang, it was the earthquake, in one of the classes there was an adult who took the wheelchair, turned it, and the kid was seeing the others performing the safety rules. In the other one, there was no additional adult, which is also interesting for the discussions on resources. There was no additional adult. When the bell rang, one of the 7-year-old kids ran, grabbed his friend from the wheelchair, dragged him through the classroom, and went under the table, protecting him. This one was included, the first one was integrated. And the big lesson is that everyone grew much more in the second class, because all kids there learned not only what to do in the case of an earthquake, but how to care about the others, and that solidarity and common life is an asset and is a value that needs to be learned. What are the characteristics of inclusive education? And later I will bridge this with what academia can do to support the education systems and above all to support the practitioners. They are preventative. They are not remediation services. So the more we invest in the early years, in the early intervention, the best results we attain. I mentioned already, they are not necessarily referential. If a child comes with a diagnosis, okay, fair enough, but we don't need the diagnosis, the clinical diagnosis, to initiate an intervention. There is this perception in schools all over Europe, all over the world actually, that there is a growing number of autistic children. There isn't. There is more diagnosis, and the spectrum has enlarged. What is considered autism has enlarged. Is this a good thing? In principle, yes, because there is more attention and more resources provided to these children. What is happening in many places is that when the children arrived with a diagnosis of autism, there is a lowering of expectations for them. So this balance between referencing and non-referencing can be very tricky, and we need to know better what to do about this. It's a multi-level approach. I will go back to this, comparing measures with financing. It is not the world of the special needs educator. In an inclusive education system, inclusion is everyone's responsibility. The school program for arts, for sports, for the school library, the school canteen, everything has to be organized in terms of inclusion. And otherwise, like I every now and then said while visiting some schools, you enter a school and you ask, where is inclusive education in this school? Oh, it's the second corridor on the right. If it's not assumed by everyone, if it's not assumed by all the students and by the parents and by the community, then it's not inclusive. It's a sector, it's a ghetto that we create in a school. It involves partnership, and this is something that we heard a lot. The talk tomorrow by the Ombudsman was very, very important for us to understand what we are talking about when we talk about partnership. And it requires also an area in which there is not much work, which is to prepare the transition from school to after school. In many cases, the school is a bit of an oasis. While the child is at the school, the child is not living in a home of violence. While the child is at the school, the child has the support according to his or her disability, but after they turn 18, what happens? Or after they leave the school at the end of the day, what happens? And sometimes going back to the neighborhood kind of erases all the good things that happened during the school day. So this transition and this collaboration is really key. So in short, and this is our position on inclusive education, we are talking about inclusion when we are talking about all learners. All means all, even those that sometimes we don't know if they are being excluded for some reason. You can go through some emotional distress. You know the invisibility of bullying. It's very invisible. You only see the results of it if you are really paying attention to every child. Bearing this in mind, that we are talking about all learners, then we draw the system to be not about categories, not about generalized solutions, but about the individual needs of each learner. And this requires a completely different organization of the schools. And this is where this good connection and cooperation between schools, academia, and the rest of society is really important. One thing that it's very important to talk to everyone. There are countries with strong reactions and some pushback going on inclusive education. And sometimes it comes from different sectors. We've heard several interventions about the rise of hate speech and segregation. This is political because we are talking about a model of society. So, and we hear it every now and then from some sectors. They say, well, inclusive education, okay, but please don't talk to me about gender identity. Leave sexual orientation. Let me be homophobic and transphobic, but I will be very inclusive. Or inclusive education, okay, if it is about disability. When it's about immigration, it's so sensible right now. Why should we talk about this? So we have to communicate with all these sectors. And I wanted to say this, one of the areas in which we find some resistance is sometimes from parents saying, yeah, I'm fine with everything, but please don't put the Roma kids in my child's class. Or are we sure that, aren't they going to delay my child if he's in these heterogeneous settings? So we have evidence, and the evidence shows that inclusion is good for the learners who have barriers, but also for the others. Because, and we've heard a lot about the new needs of this 21st century curriculum, in which collaboration, empathy, social-emotional skills are very important, especially in the context of this digital revolution that we are having. We know that the machine will outperform us very quickly, but there are things in which humanity is required and the machine will be slow. Emotions and creativity. And this is what all the learners, the peers also develop in inclusive education settings. And for any of you who considers becoming a Minister of Education, let me tell you, you'll be much happier if your government doesn't have a Minister of Finances. But the good thing, the good news is that even in terms of cost efficiency, it is better to have inclusive schools than segregated schools, if we are able to distribute and allocate the resources accordingly. What are the current challenges that we have right now, the big challenges that are identified by countries? We know some facts, and focusing on the European context, there is some decline in school achievement. We see this in some of the international assessments. In some countries, especially in the Northern European countries, early school leaving is going up. These are data that have not yet been sufficiently analyzed. And again, we need the academia here. We need research to know what is going on, rather than waiting for the next cycle of PISA or the next cycle of TEAMS or PEARLS and see where the results are. We see, and the pandemic was a big eye-opener to these strong correlations between academic achievement and well-being and the sense of belongingness. Big variation, and now focusing only on disability, big variation across Europe on where the students are, which also has to do with variations in the way the statistics are built, and I will go back to this. So the challenges. The first one is we are in a context of teacher shortage in most countries. So not only we do not have enough teachers, but in some countries, teachers leave the profession, and some say, and the last Thalys report said, I leave the profession because I do not feel prepared to work in context of diversity. And this is a big heads up for the universities and polytechnic institutes that prepare teachers. If we are not preparing teachers to be teachers in diverse contexts, we are not preparing them for real life. It's as if we were preparing medical doctors to work in hospitals only with healthy patients. That's the only comparison I can make. And there is some discussion in some international fora about teacher motivation. I have to share, yeah, we have to work on motivation, but we also have to be demanding. We would not be tolerant with a surgeon who would say, this case is too difficult, I'm not motivated. Next patient, please. So let's help the teachers, let's support the teachers, but let's be very clear about our expectations on the education systems. Second challenge, and I already mentioned this, and this was mentioned in several talks, this context of polarization. It requires a societal consensus on the social and economic benefits of inclusion. We know, and again, this is an area in which the academia can help the policymakers, we know that exclusion has terrible consequences for the future. Not only in terms of cost, in terms of social support. The more students are excluded at the early years, the more you will have cost on the social support, unemployment rates, on juvenile delinquency, on criminality. It's not the big fears that they are trying to create on links between immigration and criminality. It's on lack of education and poverty and criminality. The last Education at a Glance report from OECD had a very interesting correlation. The more you are educated, the better your salary is. That we knew already. But now we also have evidence that the more you are educated, the less you believe in conspiracy theories. So education, inclusion, inclusive education is also about the quality of our democracies. It's about the preservation of democratic values. And this is something that cannot be forgotten. And what we are experiencing, there is a great book I recommend by a researcher from the UK, Bobby Duffy. It's called The Danger of Perception, is that public speech is being more and more populated by perceptions rather than by evidence. And where is evidence produced? At the universities, in academia. And we have to be able not only to produce this evidence, but to communicate it to the outside world in very effective ways. So this is my call to the University of Patras and to all the other universities here. Then the third challenge is, of course, finances. I said that I was going to mention the multi-level approach. What you have on your right-hand side is the best model for inclusive education. Basically, it says work as much as possible in prevention, in early intervention, and leave the more additional measures when other things have failed. And make the financing of inclusive education follow this model. What happens most of the time is that because we do not do early intervention, we put all the money when things have failed. So we remediate and we end up spending much more money in solutions when failure has already happened. And this is a big challenge because this requires difficult communications with the finance departments. And data. Collecting data is very important, and sometimes policymakers do not know how to develop the best measures because the data is diverse, is a bit here and there, and we've heard it in this conference. I work with migrants, so I collect data on migrants. I work with disability, I collect data on disability. We need unified measures for collecting. We need models of data. And again, where do we define models? In academia. And this is another area in which we need your support. So what are our recommendations? The first thing is, let's be creative, and let's assume that inclusive education is not a side department. It only works if it's integrated in a global strategy. So one of our recommendations is to define inclusion in single legislative frameworks. We cannot say, I have a policy for inclusive education, and then I have a policy for assessment. And the national exams system that I have for access to university disregard completely all the path that was followed for inclusion. What is the result of that in many countries is that universities are very exclusive because many learners don't even access because the accession model was not designed for all. It was designed for the happy few that are even able to pay private tuition and other kinds of support to achieve in the national exams. But the same with the role of the inspectorates in the education systems. And in many countries, Portugal is one such example, when we do the external school evaluation, we involve the experts from the university together with practitioners so that we can have this multi-stakeholder input. Of course, and I will go back to this, professional learning, initial teacher preparation, professional development, and everything that has to do with resources. If this is in silos, it will not work. So the more we unify in terms of legislation, the best results we get. Also, and this is my propaganda to the European agency, let's work on the basis of evidence. These international organizations are not research institutes, but we have policy briefs. We work with the countries, we work for the countries as well, and academic research has to be informed by these resources that are available in the same way that the international organizations are informed by the evidence produced by researchers from universities. But if we do not work together, we will have researchers who say, nothing exists. And sometimes we come to these conferences and we hear some diagnoses that could be the same 10 or 20 years ago. Why? Because we don't communicate. So communication and collaboration is key here. Very critical, and this is an area in which we are working a lot, cross-sectoral collaboration. It is impossible. What happens many times is that teachers and schools, there is this feeling that they have to solve all the problems in the world. Why? Because a child is there every day, bringing with him all his life as a migrant, as a low socioeconomic family, as someone whose father is in jail, with health issues. And then there is this expectation from society that school has to solve everything and has to guarantee that a child achieves irrespectively of all of this. So, again, I refer to this morning's first presentation. If this is not integrated, and if we don't see the school as a hub for communication, effective communication with all these sectors, what happens most of the times is that we start pointing fingers. yeah, there is a health issue, the health department doesn't work. And then the health department says, yeah, but look at the housing conditions. How can this child be healthy? And then the housing department says, yeah, look at the salaries. And then the salaries say, yeah, if they study, they can get a better salary. And we get in this, and the child is in the middle, and no one is paying attention at the child anymore. And again, we need research on effective cross-sectoral collaboration. To move beyond the principles, yes, we agree that this collaboration is good, but please, researchers, show us how it can be effectively done. And for this, it's critical that universities work together with schools. We cannot not have this distance from schools. The research teams must involve practitioners, and the schools in your community can be these little labs where the hypotheses that we develop in academia can be tested and assessed, without ever losing something that is very important, which is scalability. We have many, many brilliant pilot projects, but when we think, okay, this is going to work at a national level, it will not be working because the pilot was too perfect. So realism and the pragmatism is also very important. I already mentioned this, but we will not have inclusive education if it's not connected with what's happening outside. Not only the polarization, one of the previous talks was about inclusion in a context of artificial intelligence. We have resources, but we also have risks and threats. I will give an example of resources in a while. And in terms of allocation of resources, the best practices involve transforming the special schools in resource centers to collaborate with the mainstream schools. And this then will not put the special schools at risk. No one is going to be fired. It's just a transformation of their professional profile so that the learners can be in schools, they can have the additional support they need, but they are there together with their peers in the same classroom, in the same building. We have to work with families, and we have to understand families, and we have to engage them in the research and in the policy design. A parent, I will give the example of disability. A parent of a child with disability is not ready to wait for the system to be ready. They want a solution today. And they have the best knowledge of their children. So we have to capitalize this knowledge when we are designing the solutions. We have to have their voice involved in the monitoring, in the quality assurance, and to really also capitalize the positive stories. When something goes wrong, it immediately hits the news. But most of the stories are positive. So we all have this responsibility of sharing the good examples, of sharing the happiness of many inclusive settings. In the showcase evidence that many of you presented today and yesterday, there were many, many examples from preschool, from kindergarten. It's not a coincidence. We have to learn so much from kindergarten. And yesterday at the festival at the university, we saw that. In kindergarten, things happen. Children work in groups. They circulate freely in the class. They bring the outside world into the learnings that they are developing. The parents collaborate. They learn. They don't fail. So something very good is happening in preschool. And then all of a sudden, we sit the children in class as if they are in a bus, all facing in the same direction. We want them to be silent, while in preschool we wanted their voices, and we wanted them to ask questions, and we triggered curiosity. So let's capitalize on the experience of preschool. Let's also be very mindful that change is incremental, and it only works if it's participated. And again, for this, we need evidence. My seventh recommendation is on this societal consensus. I've already talked about this, but one thing I'd like to share with you is that there's always very good reasons to postpone, to say we are not there yet, we are not ready, wait. And many people say, yeah, that's very beautiful, but it's not really possible. And let's look at historical cases of segregation. I like to compare the pushback or the barriers to inclusive education to what happened last century when women could not vote. What was the reason? The system was not ready. They didn't have the same capacity. We had to change the law. We did not have all the resources. And then the suffragette came and said, we can. And the system adapted to this need. And now no one, I hope, questions this anymore. So flexibility, and we talk a lot about curriculum flexibility, is the key dimension. And not to be afraid of not having the ideal situations. The role of academia I've already mentioned a lot, but I will focus on two dimensions. The first one is teacher preparedness. I can understand the frustration of a teacher that has been prepared to be a teacher of good students, or the teacher of the only student that never exists, which is the average student. The average student is the average of all those that are actually in the classroom. So in our teaching preparation programs, and this can be initial teacher preparation, but also professional development, we have to start introducing some areas as key, as fundamental, as foundational for effective teaching. First, the message that what is normal is that we are different. Suppose we all looked the same in this room. Suppose you all looked like me. This would be a very depressive room. What is normal is that we are all different. So it is normal that all learners in a class are different. But teachers are normally not prepared for this. And then they experience frustration. And they say, I don't have the tools to deal with all this diversity. The preventative measures to develop early intervention. What does this mean in practice? How do we train teachers for that? If we don't do that, what we do is to guide education systems to these meritocratic, fallacious approaches, which is to say, some are good, some are not good, but it's on them. We test them, and then we see what happens. This old school approach, we train teachers of physics, geography, history, but then the big topics of inclusion are interconnected. So we have to introduce in our teaching preparation this capacity to work as a team in the school. Otherwise, we do in the school, we do what we do in cross-sectoral collaboration. We say, that's with the special needs, that's with the psychologist, that's with my colleague who teaches mathematics. So, and this involves this curriculum flexibility. If I receive a child who doesn't speak the national language, I cannot pretend that he knows the national language. So I have to adapt. I have to be creative. I have to resort to the technology. I visited the school once, elementary school. Every kid was going around with the mobile. And I thought, oh, with all this craziness about mobile, why were they having the mobile? Because it was a school with many immigrants, and each child was the mentor of another child, and they used the translating device. They were 6-year-old. They were learning technology, they were learning language, and some of them were so proud. One of them, a 7-year-old, came to me and said, do you speak Bengali? I said, no, I do. And then he counted till 10 in Bengali. And of course, this is also about assessment, formative assessment, rather than just worrying about the exam. Also, we need research on effectiveness and efficiency. This is very critical in a context of less funds, less teachers. We need to know what works, and we don't know enough. What are the most efficient methodologies? We need to know more about how students learn, how humans learn. We are still designing education systems for us. But the kids who are now in schools were born and grow in a context of hyperstimulation. They work with 2 screens at the same time, with earphones, and of course this has an impact on attention, on memory, on attention span, on the need to diversify stimuli, on the need to refocus and work on concentration as well, but we don't know enough. We need the neurosciences here. We need to know better about the usage of artificial intelligence as a tool, not just to see it as the bad enemy. I've been playing now, when I have the time, I've been playing with ChatGPT. And what I do is prepare a lesson plan for a 10-year-old in 5th grade who needs to work to learn equations while his peers are doing something else. He has attention deficit disorder and he loves dinosaurs. And ChatGPT makes and in seconds I have a lesson plan. It requires my intervention, my critical vision. But how many weeks would I spend preparing this by myself? So there is a resource here, and we need to train teachers for this, and we need more evidence on this. A lot has been said about multiculturalism and multilingualism in this conference, and we need research on. We know about early child development. We know a lot about L2 learning. We don't really know how it happens at different ages. And students come to other countries when they are 14, when they are 6, when they are 3, and this is completely different in terms of language development. And of course, models of quality assurance are really important. I said I wasn't going to have time for this, but just show you the big titles of the country cluster activities that we are developing right now on learner participation, on monitoring and evaluation systems in inclusive education policy, on the participation of learners and families, on collaboration, a topic that I mentioned a lot, on collaborative action and quality assurance monitoring and accountability. You can Google us and find the research that we also do, but we are not a research institute. We are an agency for action with a call for action, and we need collaboration and we need the academia. Thank you very much for your attention.